Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So I wanted to talk about, I guess the big scene in this episode. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. My plan is actually, I'm going to be talking about this here in this video. I will do an episode 6 or season finale trailer breakdown. That'll be coming out after this. And then tomorrow I'll get into some of the variant walker stuff and we'll talk about some stuff that could be revealed tonight, this and that. And I mean, we'll have just like really 2 more days after that, really with like, I'll do a Q&A video and a bunch of other stuff. And then Thursday obviously is the big event where we'll get the new Rick and Michonne teaser and some big announcement I think that's coming from Norman Reedus, which I really do think is just more of a confirmation that Carol is back kind of thing. And I feel like it's going to be something like that. I don't think it's going to be anything too insane, but I mean, that's still going to be so exciting, right? So we'll have to wait and see, but there's going to be a big announcement. Obviously the Rick and Michonne teaser, people are also very excited about that. So a big week here. I posted my review. I know a lot of people wanted my review and I will try to get my reviews out earlier. So for episode 6, I will just sort of, I'll get it out earlier next week. And then going forward for Fear the Walking Dead, I'll also just sort of get my reviews out a few hours earlier because I know people really do want them around like noon. I feel like I'm getting a lot of people messaging me around like noon to like 3-4 o'clock. People are like, where's the review? And I'm constantly seeing it. So I'll try to get it out a little bit earlier because I know a lot of people do watch it in the morning. But anyways, just want to update you guys on that. But let's talk about this here. So did Carol confirm that Rick is now back in Alexandria? So I want to talk about that and talk about some other possibilities here. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. And if you haven't subscribed to the Empty Minds podcast yet, which is my podcast, definitely go do so. I will leave a link down below in the description of this video. But yeah, definitely go and subscribe. But let's talk about this here. So in this scene in episode 5, Daryl finds like a walkie-talkie or whatever, or I guess a radio, and he is just sort of, he's kind of messing around with it, but he actually comes into contact with Carol, and he's like, oh, Carol, kind of thing. And they ask each other, like, how are you doing? Doing good, this and that. And then Carol, you know, she seems a little upset about something. She just kind of seems like there's something off. And Daryl notices, and he's kind of like, you okay? Like, are things good or whatever? And Carol is kind of like, you know, no one can save me, Daryl, kind of thing, or no one can help me, or something like that, or you can't always save me. I don't remember the exact line, but it was basically she's mentioned something like that. And then it kind of cuts into this weird thing where Carol says like, or there's like this static where it's like, came back kind of thing. And I've seen a lot of people online say that it really does sound like ick. So you don't hear Rick, but you hear ick, came back kind of thing. And you do kind of hear it a little bit, but it's hard to say because that's such an easy thing in terms of saying anything where you can actually cut that out there. I will say, out of all of the possibilities of who it could be, it actually makes some sense that it could be Rick, because with Rick, I think it's just, it's one of those things where it makes some sense that I don't like, I'm trying to view how AMC or how the writers and stuff want to sort of handle the Walking Dead universe going forward, you know, and I feel like, you know, for the next 4 or 5 years, like, first of all, Daryl Dixon and Dead City will probably have 4 or 5 seasons for sure. They could go more, but I imagine it's going to be about 4 or 5 seasons. And I just think that they're probably wondering, you know, how do we get people to be excited about all of this? And, you know, how do we, you know, surface some of the story here? And I feel like a big thing that, you know, I think people have issues with is sort of Daryl's overall knowledge of stuff when it comes to Rick, right? And I feel like because Daryl is in France and he's kind of trapped, that is something that they could probably tell us, that, you know, Daryl finds out from, I guess, Carol, that Rick's actually, he's alive, he made it back home kind of thing. And so for Daryl, you know, that's obviously really good news and he's very excited and he's probably going to want to go home to go and see him, right? But, you know, I wonder if that also changes some things as well, because Daryl, like, why does he want to go back? He wants to go back to save Rick, right? But if he knows that Rick is back and he's safe, he might be like, okay, well, I guess I can take my time a little bit. You know what I mean? He might be like, at that point, like, well, maybe I can sort of take my time kind of thing, right? Like, maybe I can just, I'll wait. Like, I know he's safe, so that's good. I'll get there eventually, but I got to help Laurent and Isabel and whatever. So that's sort of my impression as of now as to where they're going here overall. But I think that the scene specifically, it really does seem like she's saying that Rick came back. And that would confirm that at some point during The Ones Who Live, Rick is going to be coming back home, right? And there are other possibilities. I will say that, like, people I think are really believing that it's Rick. I'll get into what I actually think about the whole thing at the end of this video, but people do think it's actually Rick. There are other possibilities as well, like Michonne, right? Like, she could have said Michonne came back. So in this situation, you know, I guess there's sort of 3 options when it comes to Rick and Michonne. She said Rick and Michonne came back, which in that sense is like good, right? My only issue with that is she sounded very sad. And so why would she sound so sad saying that? Like Rick and Michonne came back kind of thing, right? Like I feel like she'd be much more happier giving Daryl that news. So I think that, you know, in that scene, she could have easily said Rick came back and Michonne wasn't there, or Michonne came back, but she didn't have Rick. You know what I mean? So I think that could explain why she seemed a little bit more upset. And I think it just makes a lot of sense too, because when you're actually listening to what she says, it's like not enough time for her to say two names. It really is like she said one name specifically. And so, you know, obviously that's going to create a lot of mystery as to like, is one of them dead, or maybe just someone is captured. Maybe if Michonne comes back, it's because, you know, she couldn't actually save Rick, and so she needs help. And so it sets up a season 2 kind of thing, right? So there's a lot of possibilities here. Besides Rick and Michonne, there are other possibilities. It could be Morgan. We know Morgan's going back to Alexandria. Morgan is going to try and find Rick, right? So Morgan could be here. And that's the kind of cool thing about that is like, what if Morgan went with Carol and joined them in season 2? I mean, Morgan probably wouldn't be there, I imagine, right away, but like that's possible. Maybe Carol just said Morgan came back. You know what I mean? Or maybe it was Dwight, right? Because Dwight, we know in Fear the Walking Dead, he actually goes to the sanctuary. So he's very close at that point, right? And he's going to go to the sanctuary in these next 6 episodes here. So I think it's possible that Carol, you know, she sounded very sad or like upset kind of thing. And she probably was like, yeah, Dwight came back, you know, telling Daryl because she knew how he would react because he told him to never come back kind of thing, right? So, I mean, it's been many, many years, but I mean, Daryl, I'm sure, is still pretty upset with him. And yeah, and it's, you know, in terms of other characters and all of that, I don't know who else it could be. The reason why I'm just really leaning on the whole Rick thing is because it almost just makes a lot more sense because of the timeline and stuff, right? Like if it was Dwight, I mean, yeah, that could make sense, right? Like it just, we know it is what it is, but you got to think of, I know some people, whenever people mention, oh, it could have been Morgan, I see some fans kind of saying, well, that makes no sense because Daryl wouldn't care if it was Morgan or anyone else. That's not true. Like if Daryl found out Morgan came back, he'd be like, oh, like that's, Daryl knew Morgan. Like they weren't like the best of friends or anything like that. That was Rick and Morgan, but Daryl knew Morgan, and so that whole thing, you know, Carol also was very close. So Carol, you know, she would tell Daryl if Morgan came back because that was someone she was really close with, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense too, that Carol would say something like that. Where it's a little different for me is I try to think of the scene just as a whole, and why would they write that there? If it was Dwight or Morgan, like why write a scene like that where you know fans are going to be freaking out about it and be like, who did she reference or who did she say, right? So that's kind of why I think, you know, in terms of writing, it probably was Rick or Michonne. I think it was it could be both as well, and I do think for sure it probably was Rick. Like my whole thing when it comes to Rick and Michonne, again, I would prefer them both to survive and come back to Alexandria. I just think if one had to die, I feel like it has to be Michonne. And it's just because of, I mean, it's two things really. The comic, Andrea's death, because obviously Michonne, you know, she's taken a lot of Andrea's story from the comic. And Michonne could be, you know, she could get Andrea's death, where it's just this crazy heartbreaking scene and Rick has to like put her down kind of thing. And it's just like really, really brutal, destroys Rick entirely. And so he goes back home and he's home now. He sees Judith and RJ in that, but he doesn't have Michonne. And that's just so heartbreaking for so many reasons. There's the other thing too, which is, you know, they kind of already killed Rick off, right? Like, I feel like if they killed Rick off again in the show, it's just like, okay, I mean, you just kind of did that. Everyone thought you were dead for years and now you're just officially dead to everybody. Like, I feel like everyone would just be sort of, I don't even know about that. Like, oh, wow, we found out you're alive for like a second, right? So I don't think they're going to kill off Rick. I think Rick will make it back home. And that's why I think Carol did reference Rick here. I do think she said Rick came back. It's just a question, I think, of whether it was Rick and Michonne came back. But depends on where they want to go with the story. It depends on Denai Guerrera and Andrew Lincoln and what they decided, you know, just where to go with their story, just all of that. And if I were to give a prediction, you know, I do think she probably meant Rick came back, but I feel like a part of me is leaning more towards like, I feel like she's just kind of saying Rick came back, but she also kind of means Michonne as well. She just never mentioned Michonne because they all sort of know Michonne's out there. I think she might have just sort of referenced like Rick came back, or maybe there's a part to it where it's different for season 2 where Rick does go back to Alexandria, but it's just Rick. And now this time Michonne is like captured or something and he needs help, right? And so he goes back to Alexandria and is like, I need help kind of thing. So it could be either or. I do think overall, just what the message was, I do think it was that Rick came back. I do think Carol said that specifically to Daryl. And now it's just going to be one of those things where, when do we get this reveal? We could see it in the finale. I don't think so. I think the reveal is going to be in season 2. I think in the finale, we could see Carol arrive in France, but I don't think it's going to be anything where Carol shows up and then she like tells Daryl all this stuff. I feel like she's going to show up. She's going to reunite with Daryl, and then at some point, again, in season 2, at some point, they'll just sort of discuss everything. And I think that's where that'll come up. And then, I mean, obviously at that point, when season 2 of that show airs, we'll have watched The Walking Dead: The Ones Who Live, so we'll know what happens. And if that is only one season, we'll know at that point, or just whatever the story is going to be. Because that's the thing with all 3 shows now, is like they have to juggle the amount of information that people know. Like if this show is airing before this show, we have to make sure these characters don't ever mention anything about these other characters, because this show is ahead in the timeline and it could actually mess up the story kind of thing, right? So I think that's kind of what we're seeing here with The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, and The Walking Dead: The Ones Who Live. So definitely post your thoughts down below. Who do you think Carol referenced here? Do you think she mentioned maybe somebody entirely different than anyone that I mentioned in this video? I really feel like it comes down to those 4. It's Rick, Michonne, Morgan, or Dwight. And it really comes down to those 4 characters. And if it's not any of those 4, I mean, I don't know who else it would be. She's not going to say like Maggie came back or anything like that, because Daryl knows that they're all there, right? And yeah, I think for sure she was referencing Rick in that scene. But that's just my opinion. Definitely post your thoughts down below. Hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.